I woke up to fingers dragging along the outside of our tent. It wasn't an animal or the wind. It was slow and measured, like someone brushing their hand across the nylon wall just to see if we'd notice. We were at a campground in Oregon, nothing remote, just a simple weekend escape. A paid site with a fire ring, some neighbors and RVs and tents, and a ranger station not far from the entrance. My girlfriend and I had arrived late Friday afternoon and set up at site number 27, right on the outer edge of the loop. It was just dense forest behind us. The day had been normal, families chatting as they unpacked, the smell of grilled food, and distant laughter. After dinner, we walked down a short trail, then turned in around 10:30. The firewood we bought was damp, so we skipped the fire. No big deal. But now it was 1:30 in the morning, and someone was touching our tent. I sat up slowly and whispered, "Did you hear that?" My girlfriend stirred beside me. "What is it?" she asked. Before I could answer, a calm male voice said from right outside the tent, "Sorry to bother you, just a ranger making the rounds." I froze. It wasn't so much the words, it was how he said them, flat and emotionless, like he was reading a line he'd memorized but didn't understand. I reached towards the zipper and peeked out through the flap, aiming my flashlight. He looked official enough, tan shirt, green pants, a badge on his chest. But then I saw his feet. He wasn't wearing any shoes, just standing there barefoot in pine needles, his toes dirty and pale, and his pants were wrong. They were too short. They stopped a few inches above his ankles like they didn't belong to him. I raised the light toward his face, and he flinched, turning sharply and throwing up a hand to block the beam. For a moment, I caught a glimpse of his skin, far too pale for someone who supposedly spent his days outside. His eyes looked almost entirely white, but I didn't get a clear look before he turned his head. I swallowed and said, "Why are you here?" I lowered the flashlight, trying to keep my voice even. He didn't drop his hand, didn't look at me, just stood there, still and silent. Then after a pause, he said the same thing again. "Making a safety check." I shook my head and said, "Nothing's wrong." He didn't respond. He didn't move, and there was no goodbye. He just stood there like a mannequin left in the woods. After what felt like a full minute, I zipped the flap closed and lay back down. My heart was pounding. My girlfriend was tense and silent next to me. Her eyes were open in the dark. We didn't say much. We were too weirded out to do anything. In the morning, we both kind of pretended nothing had happened. But when we stepped out of the tent, there were bare footprints in the dirt all around our site. Clear as day, human, adult-sized. They circled the tent twice. We didn't tell anyone at the ranger station. I didn't want to explain it or be told we imagined it. We packed up and left quietly. A couple weeks later, we were at a friend's barbecue. I ended up telling the story, not to scare anyone, just a weird camping moment. People laughed, said it was probably some stoner messing around, and I let it go. But later that night, while I was getting another drink, one of the guests, a guy I didn't really know, came up to me. "Elkhorn Meadow?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, know it?" He said, "I haven't thought about that place in years. I grew up near there." He then told me something I haven't been able to forget. When he was a kid, maybe 10 or 11, he and his dad had camped in that same area. In the middle of the night, they woke up to the sound of someone walking slow, steady circles around their tent. No talking, no flashlight, just footsteps. Eventually, his dad unzipped the flap and pointed a flashlight toward the tree line. He said he saw a man in a ranger uniform walking into the woods. The man didn't have a flashlight or shoes on. He was just moving calmly into the dark like it was nothing. They packed up and left before the sun came up. He didn't say anything else after that, just sipped his drink and wandered off. But I've been thinking about it ever since. The uniform, the pale skin, the prints, and how in the silence of the forest, we never heard him leave. That was the end of our first story. Let me know in the comments how you felt about it. Also, be kind enough to take the time to like and subscribe. I'd love for you to send me your scary experiences to be read on this channel. whatever they might be. The sites to send them to are up on the screen. Now there will be no further interruptions from me, and here are the rest of the stories. The phrase didn't make sense at first. Window faces garden, but no soil is disturbed. It was spoken in a calm, steady female voice with an American accent. No background noise, no static, just a voice coming through clean on my dad's old shortwave radio. I was alone in the Uinta Mountains, middle of nowhere, no reception, no people, just me and 3 days of solitude. Exactly what I wanted. I hadn't even planned on bringing the radio. It was an afterthought tucked into my pack at the last minute. My dad used to bring it on our old camping trips and scan for weird stations after dark. Number stations, foreign news, strange chatter bouncing around the ionosphere. It always felt like some hidden layer of the world only he could tune into. I didn't touch it the first night. I was too tired after hiking in. But the second night, around 11 p.m., I turned it on out of boredom, twisting the dial through waves of static and distant voices, mostly noise. But then I found her. She was broadcasting somewhere near 6.7 megahertz. Her voice was crystal clear, but the things she said were off. Not broken English, not gibberish, just wrong. Grammatically perfect, but metaphorical in a way that didn't land. Like a dream trying to sound logical. Window faces garden, but no soil is disturbed. Then a pause. Mirrors reflect twice. All seeds are accounted for. Repeat. Window faces garden, but no soil is disturbed. Each sentence played 3 times before shifting to the next. It didn't sound threatening, just strange, curious, like riddles being read out loud for no one in particular. I wasn't scared, I was fascinated. I grabbed my notebook and started writing them down. Here are a few I copied exactly. Package sleeps beneath orchard line, do not wake. Gate remains closed unless shown proper shadow. 3 sets sail, only 2 report landing. Open crate is not an invitation. It felt like a Cold War ghost transmission or an ARG, but it also had this eerie modern rhythm, like someone was alive and well and broadcasting from somewhere not that far away. I caught about 15 unique phrases before the signal broke up and drifted into static again. I didn't try the radio after that night. I figured I'd gotten lucky. It wasn't until I got home, a week later, that I flipped back through the notebook. That's when things started to feel different. I noticed patterns, the repetition, the structure. Specific words were used with purpose. Gate, orchard, crate, landing, window. They weren't random, they were consistent. I thought maybe it was a cipher, something meant to be decoded, not just heard. I started trying common keys, gate, orchard, shadow. Nothing. I even tried basic keywords like secret and code. It was all still gibberish. Then I tried crate. No idea why, maybe because the phrase, open crate is not an invitation, felt pointed like a warning. When I used it as the Visionaire key, things started falling into place. Phrases that had sounded like poetry suddenly turned into something else entirely. Unauthorized access triggers fallback. Second drop failed. Keep channel clear. It wasn't random. It was operational. I kept testing. With crate as the key, more phrases unraveled. Package sleeps beneath orchard line. Turned into drop located east tree line, covered and marked. It was like I'd overheard instructions being passed, hidden in plain sight. Not a performance piece, not art, something functional, maybe even criminal. I searched forums and dug deep. I found one post, a guy in Colorado who'd heard something like poetry on 6.7 megahertz in March. It didn't have any replies and the post was deleted a week later. Another ham operator in Nevada mentioned a female voice reading strange instructions about shadows and crates in April. He thought it was a prank. That was it. No other chatter, no origin, no call signs, just fragments. I considered reporting it, but how do you explain something like that? Still, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Why encrypt it if it was harmless? Why broadcast it like it was meant to be heard but not understood? And why did the phrase, "window faces garden but no soil is disturbed," decode too? We were seen, no action taken, delay next step. I don't listen anymore. The radio's in my closet wrapped in a bandana. The notebook's tucked in the back of a drawer. But sometimes late at night, I wonder what else I missed. What was still being said after I turned the dial to static? And what might have happened if the wrong person cracked the rest of it? I'm not exactly what you'd call a seasoned camper, but I've done my fair share of solo trips. Usually I stick to well-used trails and familiar sites. But last fall I wanted something quieter, so I picked a remote spot in a national forest about 4 hours from the nearest gas station. The hike in was uneventful. I followed a dry creek bed up a ridge, cut through some second-growth fir, and found a decent clearing about 100 yards off an old service road. I made camp, got a fire going, and boiled some water for dinner. I didn't see or hear anyone all day. Around 10 p.m., I was brushing my teeth when I noticed a light moving through the trees. Just a flicker, like a flashlight beam weaving between trunks far off in the woods. It wasn't steady. It blinked a little, like the person holding it kept changing their grip or was struggling with bad batteries. I figured it was another camper looking for a trail or trying to get their bearings, so I called out. I got no response. After a minute or two of watching it flicker, I grabbed my flashlight and walked toward it. The second I started moving, the flickering light did too. It was always just ahead, a little further in. It wasn't fast, but steady. I kept thinking I'd catch up to whoever it was, but after 10 minutes of dodging branches and uneven ground, I realized the light was leading me deeper and deeper into the woods. There was no trail, no sign of a camp. Eventually I stopped. The light blinked one last time through the trees and didn't come back. I turned around and headed back to my tent, a little annoyed. I didn't feel like getting lost trying to help someone who didn't want it. After about an hour, the light came back, from the other side this time, lower in the trees and farther off. I didn't say anything, just watched it from the edge of camp. After a few minutes, I picked up my flashlight again and started walking toward it. The same thing happened. Every time I got close, the flicker moved deeper into the woods, just out of reach. No matter how fast I moved or how directly I walked toward it, the distance always stayed the same. It never sped up. It never turned back. It just kept ahead. I followed it further than I should have the second time. When I stopped and looked around, I couldn't even see my fire anymore. I could only see the trees. I stood still for a long time, listening, trying to hear footsteps or twigs breaking, but there was nothing. The light faded between the trees and didn't return. I retraced my steps and got back to camp close to midnight. The third time I saw it, I didn't even get up. I just sat in my tent and watched it flicker. After a while, it disappeared again. Then it came back from a different direction, then another. It kept happening and I stopped keeping track. It was always the same pattern. The light would appear, stay in place for a few minutes, then start to drift as soon as I moved toward it. Never toward camp, always deeper, never fast, just far enough to stay out of reach. It went on like that until the sky started to lighten behind the trees. When the sun finally came up, the light didn't come back. I packed up quickly and hiked out the way I came in. I didn't rush, but I didn't linger either. I didn't see anyone on the trail, and there weren't any signs of another campsite nearby. I still think about those lights sometimes, how they didn't react, didn't acknowledge me, didn't seem to care I was even there. They weren't warning me or even threatening me. They were just moving. Where to? I don't know, but it was never back toward where I came from. We found the journal on the third night of our trip. It was stuffed into the edge of an old fire pit at a half-forgotten campsite, tucked a few hundred feet off of a spur trail we only followed by accident. The pit itself was shallow and half filled with old ash, damp pine needles, and what looked like the remnants of a sock. We were clearing it out to get a fire going when Alex pulled something out from under one of the stones. At first, we thought it was trash, a warped notebook, soft-covered, scorched around the corners. But Sarah flipped it open and held it toward the light. "There's writing in here," she said. We didn't think much of it at first. We passed it around like you would any weird lost item, expecting sketches or trail notes, maybe a packing list or something funny. But it wasn't that. It started strange and stayed that way. Here are some of the excerpts. "Dog-legged clouds again, can't be 3 in a row. Heard them last night. Like breath but inside out. Stay still and it won't hear. Still. Woke up with dirt on my tongue. Washed it 3 times. No footprints. Teeth are fine. Still checked. Clock said 2:14 but the sun's up. Watch says 5:23. Trees look copied again. Too even. That's not right." It didn't read like poetry. It didn't read like a story. More like someone trying to make sense of their own thoughts before they slipped away. There were no dates, no headings, just pages and pages of short, frayed sentences. It looked like whoever wrote it had been out there alone for a while. The voice behind the writing felt scattered but not incoherent, like the kind of paranoia that shows up when you've been too isolated for too long. More pages followed with similar writing. Echoes sound off again, hollow in the wrong places. I say hello and it comes back slower than it left. Saw someone on the far bank, gray jacket. He stopped when I did. I waved, he didn't. Felt like watching myself from behind a glass wall. Coughing under the leaves, that's how it sounds. Nobody said it out loud, but something about it made us uncomfortable. Even Alex, who's usually the skeptic of the group, stayed quiet while we flipped through it. The name J. Weber showed up once in the back of the book, along with a smudged birthday and a blood type. There weren't any contact numbers, no mention of where he came from or when he arrived. We read more by the fire that night. The entries didn't follow a clear timeline, but they got more fragmented the further in we went. There was a page where he repeated the phrase, "I don't own a blue tarp," over and over. Another where he described a second tent near his, identical but flattened, with no opening. And then, something behind the ridge, heard it unfold. Polite feet, no crunching. I noticed that, I shouldn't have. Camp is smaller today. I counted 6 steps to the tree, now it's 9. The fire won't stay lit past 10. That's the rule now. He was wearing my jacket, just watching. There were drawings too, jagged trees, a fire ring, and in one, a small eye floating between the trunks. No one mentioned staying up late after that. The next morning, we left the site early and didn't really talk about why. Sarah said the ground was sloped weird. Alex thought the creek sounded off. I packed up without saying anything. No one wanted to stay a 4th night. I took the journal. I shouldn't have, but I did. A few days after we got home, I started looking through it again. Not because I thought it meant anything. I just couldn't stop thinking about the guy who wrote it. The way he tried to explain things that didn't make sense. The precision of it. Like he knew what he was writing didn't sound right, but he needed to document it anyway. There was one final page glued to the inside back cover that I hadn't noticed in the woods. Just 3 lines written in small, neat handwriting. "Don't look at the reflections here, they look back. No one's come for me, but I saw someone watching the old road. He was wearing my jacket." I tried to find him, searched for J. Weber, checked missing persons reports from the last 10 years in that part of the state. I didn't find anything that matched. I even emailed a ranger I'd met a couple years earlier on a different hike, just to ask, in a roundabout way, if she'd ever heard of someone living off-grid out there. A long-term solo camper, maybe someone who'd gone off their meds or just wanted to disappear. Her reply was short, but the tone came through. "You'd be surprised how often it happens," she wrote, "and how few of them leave anything behind. I still have the journal. It's sealed in a bag on a shelf in the closet. I haven't shown it to anyone else. I don't think whatever happened was supernatural. The guy might have just lost touch with reality. Maybe the isolation got to him. Maybe he was already unraveling before he ever made it out to the woods. But still, I can't stop thinking about how carefully he tried to explain things that made no sense. Not to convince anyone, but maybe just to hang on to something solid while the rest slipped away. Maybe that's all it was. Someone doing their best not to disappear entirely. I don't know, but for something that reads like the inside of someone's head falling apart, it's strange how complete it feels. Like he finished what he meant to write. Last fall, my friend Matt and I did a 2-night camping trip in northern Oregon. We picked a remote patch of forest about 10 miles off a service road. It wasn't a marked campground, just a clearing near an old logging route that we'd found online. We wanted something quiet, off the radar, and it delivered. No other hikers, no traffic, just a wide stretch of mossy forest, cool air, and the steady hum of crickets at night. The first day was nothing special. We pitched the tent, collected firewood, and fished for a bit in a nearby creek. That night we made dinner, passed around a flask, and stayed up talking until almost midnight. It was the kind of trip where nothing really happens, and that's the point. But sometime after we'd gone to bed on the second night, we both woke up to something strange. It was a voice, or voices, far off, muffled but distinct. It wasn't shouting or yelling, more like low speaking in unison, kinda like chanting. Matt sat up in his bag and looked at me. "You hearing that?" he asked. "Yeah," I whispered. "I don't know where it's coming from." We listened for a few minutes, not moving. The sound came in waves, rising and falling every few seconds, like it was being carried on the wind. It didn't sound close, probably a few hundred yards out deeper into the woods. We sat there half awake, trying to make sense of it. Eventually it faded out. We figured it was some weird acoustic echo, maybe water or birds or something stupid playing tricks on us. I remember joking that it was forest monks, and Matt laughed. We both went back to sleep. But maybe half an hour later it came back. This time it was louder, still not close, but enough to hear the rhythm of it. A rising and falling hum that almost sounded like words, though I couldn't understand them. It would go for 20 or 30 seconds, then stop, then start again. Sometimes from the same direction, sometimes from the left or right. Matt sat up again. He didn't say anything for a while. Finally he muttered, "Okay, that's not wind. Someone's out there." I didn't respond, we just listened. Another burst of chanting started, then stopped. Then another. It kept doing that for almost 20 minutes. I couldn't tell how many people were speaking. It wasn't loud or frantic, just steady and low, like they'd done it before. Then Matt got up and started putting on his boots. "Where are you going?" I asked. "I just want to see how far off it is. I'll take the flashlight and stay in earshot." "You think that's smart?" He shrugged. "I won't get close. I just want to see if I can see anything. It's probably just some weird hippies." He stepped out into the dark with his light moving quietly. I sat on the edge of the tent, watching the beam bob between the trees until it disappeared. For about 10 minutes I heard him moving, then silence. Then the chanting started again, longer this time. No breaks. It sounded like it had shifted a little further away. I waited, trying to keep my breath steady. My ears were tuned to every crack of a branch, every rustle in the brush. Finally, I heard footsteps coming back. Matt emerged from the trees with a flashlight, pale and quiet. He stepped into camp and just stood there for a second like he was still listening. I asked him what he saw. He didn't answer right away. Then he crouched next to the fire ring and said quietly, "There's a clearing not far, maybe 15 minutes up. There were people standing in a circle." "How many?" "I don't know, 10, maybe more." I waited. They weren't talking, just chanting over and over. I stayed behind a stump, but they didn't see me. "What were they doing?" He paused again. There was something in the middle of the circle. I couldn't see what, but they all had their hands up like they were praying or blessing it or something like that. Nobody moved. Nobody looked around. "Did you hear any words?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not in English." We both sat there in silence for a while. Neither of us said the word cult, but it was hanging there, unspoken. After a few minutes, the chanting stopped. Nothing else happened, No footsteps, no lights, no sounds. We didn't sleep the rest of the night, just laid in our bags listening, waiting to hear it again, but it didn't come back. At sunrise, we packed everything fast. No coffee, no breakfast. Just got our gear together and headed down the ridge. We didn't say much until we were back at the car. On the drive home, Matt said, "It didn't feel like they were doing anything violent, just weird. But I didn't want to hang around long enough to find out." We never found any news about a group or event out there. No missing persons, no articles. Just a patch of deep woods far from any trail, where people gathered in the middle of the night to chant in circles. I still camp, but not in that forest, and not anywhere without a few other tents nearby. Last summer, I was backpacking solo through the German countryside, mostly sticking to smaller villages and forest trails south of Wurzburg. It was the kind of trip you take when your life feels stuck, just enough money in the bank and a pack on your back. A few days of hiking through the Spessart region, I found a good spot to camp, a wooded patch just off a disused fire road near what looked like the remains of an old stone wall. No signs, no traffic, no noise. It was perfect. I set up camp and stayed for 2 nights. The second day, I wandered deeper into the forest to kill some time and stretch my legs. There were no trails, just deer paths and dense pine with beech trees. Maybe 200 meters from camp, I spotted a patch of ground that didn't match the rest. It was too flat, too clean. I walked over and saw the moss was thinner there. When I stepped on it, it gave slightly underfoot with a hollow thud. I brushed some dirt away and hit rusted metal. It was a hatch, circular, solid, bolted into concrete beneath the forest floor. There was no visible lock, no symbols, no markings at all, just a centered handle. I turned it out of curiosity. It stuck at first, then groaned as it loosened. A puff of cold, stale air hissed out from beneath. I opened it fully. Inside was a steep concrete stairwell disappearing into black, damp walls, no graffiti, no junk. Just clean, solid construction. I didn't go in right away. I went back to camp, grabbed my headlamp, and returned about an hour later. The hatch was still open. The air down there smelled like dust and stone, but nothing rotten or dangerous. I descended slowly. The stairs dropped about 20 feet before ending in a landing, and a door, thick steel, a few centimeters ajar. Beyond it was a concrete room, maybe 4 by 6 meters. It had emergency-style lights glowing dim orange in the ceiling. There was a cot in one corner, a bolted-down desk, and a small cabinet mounted to the wall. No furniture, no personal items, just a sterile, sealed space. But the power was still on. There was a low hum coming from somewhere in the walls. Not loud, barely noticeable, but steady. I traced the sound to a fuse box near the door. One switch was flipped on. I knew enough German to know it meant main power supply. I didn't touch it. I stood there in the stillness, just absorbing the strangeness. There were no smell of animals, no signs of decay. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused. Then I saw a second door on the far wall, this one heavier, fully shut and sealed tight. No handle, just a slot in the metal like something was meant to be inserted. Above it, stenciled in faded paint, was a number 03. That was enough for me. I backed out, climbed the stairs, and left the hatch open behind me. I don't know why. Maybe I was in a rush. Maybe I didn't want to touch it again. I told myself I'd take photos the next day. Bring back a real light. Maybe even record a video. At the time, it didn't feel dangerous, just surreal. That night, back at my campsite, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that second door, the hum, the clean concrete. It didn't make sense that something so intact and powered could be hidden in the woods like that, with no signposts or fencings or warnings. At some point in the early morning, I thought I heard something, a distinct click. Just once, then silence. I convinced myself it was an animal stepping on a branch. A little later, I packed up camp. I figured I'd stop by the hatch once more before heading out. just to check it again in daylight. I followed the same path, and when I got to the clearing, I stopped cold. The hatch was closed again. The handle was turned back into the locked position. The dirt and moss around it had been disturbed lightly, but there were no boot prints, no tire marks, no sign of anyone else. I was sure I hadn't closed it. I walked up slowly and rested my hand on the metal. I gripped the handle and tried to turn it again. It wouldn't budge. It felt sealed from the inside. I stood there for a long time just listening. No sound came from below, no hum, no movement. Eventually I walked away. I didn't take photos, I didn't mark the spot. I just left. 2 days later, I tried looking online for anything about old bunkers in that part of the Spessart. Military records, Cold War installations, decommissioned NATO stations. I found lists, maps, old documents. Nothing matched the location I'd been in. I even went as far as pulling up old satellite maps. I thought maybe I could find the clearing again. I couldn't. Everything out there looks the same once you're deep enough in. Trees, moss, and shadows. I haven't told anyone else up until now, because there's nothing to prove, nothing to explain. There's just one fact that won't leave my head. I left that hatch wide open, and someone sealed it shut before I came back. I was camping alone in the Deschutes National Forest last September, something I try to do once or twice a year to reset. Nothing fancy. Just me, a hammock tent, some dehydrated meals, and a paperback or two. I always go off trail, maybe 2 miles from any marked site, just to get the real quiet. On the second night, just after dark, I was reading in my hammock when I heard knocking. Not footsteps, not wind, but a definite knock, knock, knock on wood. It sounded like it came from maybe 50 feet off. At first, I figured it was a branch falling or an animal hitting a tree. It wasn't rhythmic, just 3 distinct knocks. Then again, knock, knock, knock. Same cadence, same spacing. That caught my attention. I clicked off my headlamp and listened. Crickets, breeze, then knock, knock, knock. This time from a different direction. Now I was fully sitting up. After the 3rd round, I picked up the walking stick I'd left near the fire ring and gave the nearest pine tree a quick thump, thump, thump. Half joking, half testing. Like you might knock back at a noisy neighbor through the wall. A few seconds later, knock, knock, knock. Same spacing, same rhythm. It didn't scare me, not exactly. It just made me weirdly alert, like I'd accidentally initiated a conversation in a language I didn't speak. The next knock came from further back in the woods. Then another, even closer. Over the next 10 minutes, it happened maybe 5 more times. Always 3 knocks, never more, never less. I never saw anything. I never heard any movement, just the knocks. Eventually, I called out, "Hey, you good out there?" No response, nothing moved. Then about 30 seconds later, knock, 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 directly east of camp. That was the last one I heard for the night, and I didn't sleep too great. Next morning, I chalked it up to some strange echo or animal messing around. I'd heard of hikers knocking to communicate, but there shouldn't have been anyone else out there. I hadn't passed a soul on the hike in. The day was uneventful. I did a loop up to a ridge and back, maybe 6 miles total. Ate dinner, made some tea, and got back into the hammock around dusk. Around 9, just as the last of the light faded, I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. I froze. It had been over 24 hours. I sat there still and quiet, and it came again. 3 solid knocks, deeper in the woods this time, but unmistakable. I stayed in my hammock and didn't respond. I figured if it was some prank or weird territorial thing, it would stop if I didn't play along. But it didn't stop. Over the next hour, the knocks came from different spots, always in sets of 3, always moving, sometimes further away, sometimes closer. At one point, the knocks came from 2 different directions within a minute of each other. I tried to convince myself it was just sound bouncing around or woodpeckers, or maybe water dripping off of the trees. But deep down I knew it wasn't. It wasn't random, it wasn't natural. It was someone or something mimicking what I'd done the night before. Eventually I stopped counting how many times I heard it. I didn't sleep that night either. In the morning, the woods were dead quiet. No birds, no wind. I made coffee with shaking hands, packed up, and didn't even finish my breakfast before hiking out. I didn't tell anyone about it for a while. I felt kind of stupid. There was nothing dramatic, no confrontation, no glowing eyes or voices in the dark. Just knocks. Same rhythm, same beat. Like something out there had heard me knock once and decided to keep the conversation going. I never knocked back again. I've been camping for years. Weekends, solo trips, nothing fancy. Usually I can handle bugs, cold nights, and weird noises. But this one trip still messes with me. It was mid-July, way warmer than usual for that area of the state. The kind of summer heat that makes the woods feel sticky, almost like the trees themselves are sweating. I'd picked a spot near a small unnamed lake, away from any marked trails. No other campers nearby, perfect for some quiet time. First night was normal, fire crackling, crickets chirping, maybe a raccoon or two rustling through the brush. I slept in my standard hammock, a double-walled tent, sleeping bag rated for 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and a decent foam pad. It was comfortable enough. But the second night was different. I woke up shivering, teeth chattering. I reached up and checked the small digital thermometer I'd hung from the tent ceiling. It read 58 degrees. Not cold, not even close. The air outside felt warmer when I unzipped the tent in the morning, thick and humid. I shrugged it off. Maybe it was just a bad patch of night. Night 3 was even worse. Waking up freezing again, I decided to check the temperature outside the tent. Earlier that day, I'd stuck a second analog thermometer into the dirt near the tent entrance to keep track of the outdoor temperature. Crawling out, I grabbed it. It still read about 60 degrees, too warm to explain why I was freezing inside. I double-checked the tent seams, thinking maybe a vent was open or the wind had shifted. Nothing. The tent was zipped tight. That night, I had a fitful sleep, and when dawn came, I noticed the ground inside the tent was damp. Not soaked, but just enough to feel weird on my sleeping pad. By night 4, I was starting to get annoyed. I thought maybe my sleeping bag was wet or broken, so I set up my old one inside the tent and brought in extra clothes. Still, the cold woke me, worse than before. I caught myself sitting straight up in my bag around 2 a.m., heart pounding, the cold so sharp it felt like needles on my skin. I was sure something was wrong with the tent, or maybe the spot I'd picked. I did a full sweep of the campsite in the daylight. No obvious water pooling, no wind gusts. The trees were still. The lake was calm. That afternoon, I noticed a shallow depression in the dirt near the tent, like someone had pressed their palm or knee there recently. I checked around but didn't see footprints or any other signs of a visitor, just that odd patch of compressed earth. That night, I took a photo of the inside tent thermometer and the clock. 2:17 a.m., 58 degrees. When I woke again freezing, the photo confirmed the temperature hadn't dropped, but the cold was real. It was like the air inside was a different temperature from outside. I never mentioned any of this to friends. Who would believe me? The final night, I decided to stay up for a while, waiting for the cold to come. Around 1:30 a.m., I noticed the tent zipper was halfway open. I'm certain I zipped it tight before going to sleep. I sat up and looked outside. The air around the tent was still, but the space just beyond the zipper looked darker than the rest of the campsite. I shone my flashlight into the woods, but no movement. I zipped the tent back up, triple-checked it, and stayed awake until sunrise. When morning came, the zipper was again slightly undone. There was a small pile of dirt inside the tent, near the foot of my sleeping bag. No idea where it came from. I packed up and left right after breakfast. Back in town, I asked the local ranger about that part of the woods. He hesitated but finally said, That area is known for cold spots. It happens sometimes and no one's sure why. Might be underground springs or weird air currents. When I pressed, he added quietly, "Old stories say the trees there don't like being disturbed." I didn't ask for more. I don't know what happened those nights. Could have been a draft or some weird pocket of cool air. Maybe my gear was faulty. Whatever it was enough to make me pack up early and head home.